Chapter 14, Psychographics, Values and Lifestyles. In some of the previous slides, I've mentioned what people value. Well, here we're actually going to talk about what are values and how they relate to the belief system. And the reason why this is important is because, or why this falls in the external influences, is because values are developed and learned based upon the societies in which we are reared. So in looking at this, it's good to understand from a cultural perspective, what are the values within that particular society, particularly if you are ever involved or you are involved in any type of international marketing. So in looking at psychographics simply looks at psychological, what we think and feel, and how that relates and interacts with our behavioral characteristics. When we talk about values, they're enduring beliefs that a given behavior or outcome is desirable or good. That's basically all a value does mean. However, there's different types of values that can cover different ranges. Global means that it covers everything. It's pervasive. It's a guiding principle that we employ in many different situations in our lives. It doesn't matter whether it's work, play, family, home. Terminal means it's a desired end state. Instrumental is how are we going to get there? And values can also be domain specific. You should be familiar with these different types of values and examples of each. When we look at the values of Western culture, on this particular slide we can see these are things that generally are considered important or good or desirable in Western culture. So if we were to look at the Pacific Northwest, certain values, or within Portland, that may be particularly prominent in this area, one may say the environment, or perhaps health, or technology, or the importance of work and play, and the work of individualism. And these values, although they can always be present, some may be stronger than others depending upon where in this particular culture or where regionally someone may be located. The other thing to understand is that values change, and understanding, particularly from a marketer perspective, on keeping abreast of where those values are changing to identify what is important to people, what do they think overall is desirable and good. And then when we look at culture and values, we can look at different dimensions that perhaps you've been exposed to in other courses, but we look at individualism versus collectivism. Is it good for the individual? What's good for the individual is of utmost importance, or is it of utmost importance as far as what is good for the group? Uncertainty avoidance speaks of risk. Some cultures are very risk adverse, others embrace risk. The United States would be considered more risk aggressive when you think of entrepreneurism per se. And masculinity versus femininity, kind of going back to chapter 12 and looking at consumer diversity, as far as masculine meaning agentic, assertive, feminine more of a communal nature. And then power distance. What is the power distance potentially between the different social classes? And then from this, you can look at, and if you understand the underlying values that drive someone's behavior, then you are really truly getting into the heart of that, the heart and the head of that particular consumer. And an example of doing this, or one way of how this is actually applied, is the example of a means-end chain analysis. And if we focus on the product beer, segment 1 and segment 2, the consumer in both of these segments is consuming the same product. So the actual behavioral outcome is the same, but the values that are driving it are different. And what is illustrated in this particular slide is that based upon understanding those underlying values, you can see that from a marketing perspective, the attributes and the benefits that you would communicate would be fundamentally very different between the two groups. But you would not know this unless you understood what was the underlying values driving this particular type of consumption.